edition of World Voices for the year, which is our Arts House program that features international writers to our local audiences. We are so pleased, and this was 1 year in the planning, to have Twan Eng come and close the year off for us. Before, I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight, Mr. Pan Ming Yen, who wanted me to describe him as a useless bum, but I think he is a wonderful educator, a published author, and an all-around pretty good moderator. So,
okay, thank you very much, all of you, for coming, as Lisa said, on the weekday and braving the rain, and thank you, Twan Eng. Actually, if I may ramble on with this.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, it's almost 6 years ago, exactly this month, that Twan Eng was first here. He was here in 2007 for the Singapore Writers Festival, and at the time, his first book, The Rain, had just come out. And very strangely, actually, I was moderating him for at least 10 minutes until something happened and I had to moderate the session. So I'm glad I had this opportunity to pick up where I left off. And secondly, as I was telling Twan Eng, there's a little anecdote I must tell you about the Gift of Rain. About 2 years ago, when still with the Arts House, I was in Bratislava, which is the capital of Slovakia. And we were in a big bookshop that's like it's a Slovakian version of Borders. And so my partner there, who's Slovakian, he was wondering, recommend me some books. And okay, the only books they have there were Slovakian, Czech, Hungarian, and German. Right? So what to recommend him? Luckily, there was an Asian section. And very interestingly, they had a copy of A Gift of Rain in Czech. And so I did a very unpatriotic thing by recommending a Malaysian book to my Slovakian counterpart. Admittedly, at that time, I was holding a Malaysian passport, okay? So I can justify it. All right. And then after a week or two later, I got this email and he said, "Dear Ming Yen, what have you done to me? I'm really thinking of Laksa and I want to go to Penang now. And I said, okay, I'm supposed to sell Singapore to Slovakia. I recommended a book and my partner wants to go to Penang. So I said, but having said that, I think that testifies to the power of Twan Eng's first book, The Way in which he very strongly evokes Penang. Those of you who have read it, how many have read it? Sorry. Okay, great. And how many have read his second book? Okay, great. Okay, good. And in one of his interviews on the net, I think he has mentioned that he wanted Penang as a character, and some of the characters in the book are named the streets of Penang. And actually, for me, one of the strongest things and the most powerful thing about Twan Eng's books is his strong evocation of a sense of place and space, in which sets a very strong background and context to which the characters have happened. I know if you Google the internet, you can find a lot of interviews with him talking about history and memory, but very strangely, what draws me to the book is actually how he evoked Cameron Highlands. Having grown up in Malaysia and been to the place he writes about, as I was telling just now, I said, what the heck, I can't write about these places anymore. He's written all that needs to be written about Cameron Highlands. So I think without much further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Twan Eng, who will say something about his books, and we'll do a reading, and then after that, ask him some questions and go open to the floor. Okay? Twan Eng.
Thank you very much. Coming, as Ming Yen said, on a rainy night like this, it's actually very wonderful to be back here. I've been looking forward to this for a very long time. As Lisa said, it's been a year in planning. I have very fond memories of my first time here in 2007. So it's great. It feels like, in a way, coming home in many ways. Let me tell you a bit about the genesis of The Garden of Evening Mist. After I finished writing The Gift of Rain, I was thinking what else to write now, because when you're working on the first book, you can't really think of the second book, because I basically gave everything I had to the first book, because you never know whether there's going to be an opportunity to write the second one. So you threw everything in, kitchen sink, kitchen cabinets, everything was in there. So by the time I came to the second book, the well was dry. There was nothing, no water left in the well. So I had to let the well fill up again. And it was actually in Johannesburg, in a cocktail party. I was introduced to the actual gardener of the Emperor of Japan. He had been commissioned by a very, very wealthy family, who I can't name because they'll probably send their lawyers after me. they commissioned this guy, who's actually the gardener, the gardener of the Emperor of Japan, to fly first class, of course, to Johannesburg and design and create this Japanese garden on their property. The gardener did not speak English and I can't speak Japanese, so it was all yes. So 5 minutes, he probably forgot about me immediately, but I never forgot about him because that's his job description, the Emperor's Gardener. It's so evocative, it rang so many bells, and I thought, I have to create a character like that, I want to write about him. And yet, it took me a long time to actually start writing this book because I knew nothing about gardening. I could not appreciate it. I'm a city boy. So I really tried very hard to think of another idea. But you know, if the writers who are here, you know that when a good idea strikes you, you cannot let it go. You have to cling on to it, even though it's incredibly hard, even though you have no expertise about it. But you know here, it's a worthwhile idea to pursue. So I did the necessary research from the ground up. Really micro things. If I wrote a scene where Yunling walks and sees a flower, I'd have to research whether that flower can grow in Cameron Highlands at that time as well. So everything was like an actual Japanese garden, was a micro-plan. That's one of the reasons it took so long to write the second book. And the character of Yunling came to me quite early. I saw her as this person who had been damaged in the war. With The Gift of Rain, I wrote about the Second World War, pre and Second World War. With this one, I wanted to move to the next stage. Even though a lot of critics say, oh, the two books are almost similar, but if you look at them, they're not. So when the character came to me as well, I started writing this woman, very unlikable, very difficult to empathize with because of what she had gone through. And it was incredibly difficult to get to know her, even for me, because I felt she was fighting me all the way. She was not opening herself to me, so I didn't know her at all. I was just really just sketching her out. And it wasn't until I got to the part where I wrote about the experiences in the camp that she sort of cracked open and revealed herself to me, and I sort of understood her then. And after I wrote that chapter, it was a huge relief because now I know who she is. So I had to go back to page 1 again and start from the first page. Everything that I've discovered later, I had to bring back to the first page. So this book is primarily about memory and forgetting. So I'm going to read a small section where, you know, it's very hard to write about things like memory, remembering, and forgetting. How do you describe it to the reader? This nebulous, intangible thing. So there's this section where I tried to do my best. This takes place, as you can see, right towards the end, and it's after Yunling has been writing about her past. She comes to this point in time where she is about to finish her work of writing. It's in chapter 23. In the last 4 days, the words that refuse to come to me when I call for them, and I can only stare at the paper. When they do leak from my pen, I am unable to make sense of them. Only when I work at night am I untroubled by spells of word blindness. So I go on, writing as much as I can before I fall asleep. Since midnight, I have been sitting at the desk, working over the pages in which I had set down the events in the internment camp, making changes to my choice of words and the structure of my sentences. I am wearing my cardigan, but The study is cold and my fingers hurt. I get up from my chair and walk around the room, massaging my neck. My body is sore, but it's a wonderful kind of soreness resulting from hard physical labor. I have started practicing Kyudo. After a few sessions, I can feel the old lessons I have learned returning to me. Going back to my desk, I turn a few pages and read over what I have written. Even monkeys fall from trees. Yes, I'm quite certain that was what Fumio told me before he cut my fingers off. Memory is like patches of sunlight in an overcast valley, shifting with the movement of the clouds. Now and then, the light will fall on a particular point in time, illuminating it for a moment, before the wind seals up the gap, and the world is in shadows again. There are moments when, remembering what happened, I am unable to continue writing. What troubles me more than anything, however, are the instances when I cannot recall with certainty what has taken place. I have spent most of my life trying to forget, and now all I want is to remember. I cannot remember what my sister looked like. I do not even have a picture of her. And my conversation with Aritomo by Usugumo Point on that night of the meteor shower, did it take place on the day of Templar's visit, or did it occur on a different evening entirely? Time is eating away my memory. Time and this illness, this trespasser in my brain. Thank you.
Thanks, Twan Eng. Okay, as I said, at this juncture, we don't mind if I ask some questions just to get it going. The reason is that as I was studying Twan Eng, when I finished reading this book about a year ago now, I picked up at the airport and I read on the plane, and I just continued reading it after that.
It was a long flight.
Well, anyway, so, and then when I finished reading it, I just had a talk about it to some people. But, and it's very hard to come up with questions which we have not really been asked and which one cannot find on the internet. So, okay, so that actually the three questions now, the third one just came to my mind. And I think the first one would have to do, which I mentioned to you earlier, on the parallel between the character Aritomo, the gardener, and Jim Thompson, the American silk king, who also walked out in the jungle and vanished. And so what we have is the two parallels, a fictional character, a fictitious character, Aritomo, and a real-life character, Jim Thompson, and they both do the same thing. They just walk out in the jungle and they disappear. And they both have their lives that's related to something tactile. Jim Thompson was a silk king, tactile, dealing with silk, and in your book, Aritomo deals with gardening, and he deals with woodpins, and then he deals with tattoos. I was just wondering that when you were creating the character Aritomo, whether or not this real life character Jim Thompson became a person.
Well, you really can't write about Cameron Highlands without being aware of Jim Thompson, isn't it? Especially for us in Asia. He's such a legend to a lot of people. So when I started, when I realized I had to set the book in Cameron Highlands for very prosaic reasons, because to create a Japanese garden, you have the right sort of environment and weather. So I couldn't set it in Penang again. And I looked around and I realized that Cameron Highlands was the most suitable location for setting for this book. And of course, I'm very much aware of Jim Thompson, the legend of Jim Thompson. But I didn't want to write about him. I didn't want to. There's so many books I've been writing about him anyway. What else fresh can I bring in? So when I met this Japanese gardener, and I decided to create a character of a Japanese gardener, it seemed quite inevitable that he would end up in the same way as Jim Thompson because of, as you said, the background. They both have a sort of vague espionage connection. And I wanted also to create this character who would never be forgotten by A, first of all, Yunling, and B, also by the people living around it. And the only way the strongest way to create such a personality is to have people wonder what happened to him, because if he died, it's a very clear ending that, oh, he died, his grave is there, but if he went missing, there's always the unsolved question in the character's minds and also in the reader's minds as well. But it's very interesting what you mentioned about the tactile thing, because that never occurred to me. So,
It's great to ask you questions you haven't been asked.
yes. It's challenging evening tonight.
Yeah, okay. And actually, the other question was about, so that's great. So reading the book, I looked at the author's notes to see what I can find to ask him. And I came across something very interesting, which as I said, I was just reminded about. This is got to do with music. In this entire book, which is, for those who have read it, it's almost quite still because of the nature of the book. But there's a piece of music that's played actually quite interestingly in the book, and this is the second movement of the Chopin's F minor concerto. And it is an interesting work because the background to this work, as you may know, and I'll just share with the audience, it was a myth and legend has it that the slow movement of Chopin's F minor concerto is meant to be a love song between Chopin, who was then about 18, 19, and he was in love with this singer around the same age. And this whole, it's written in a very, it's almost like Italian opera kind of style. And so apparently it's a love song to her. And the character actually listens to this. I was just wondering of your choice of this music, is it by chance or you happen to like the work? And you chose an interesting version, a version for string, quartet, and piano. The work originally written for orchestra and piano. So I was just wondering to see about it.
Well, I've always liked that piece of music, and when I write, I always have music playing, the same piece of music in a loop going on the entire day. So thank goodness for earphones, because otherwise the people around me would be driven crazy. But that and the other movements as well, I listen to those all the time. And I wanted to bring that in because it begins in a very wistful and wispy way as well. It's misty as well. And I had in my mind the picture of the opening notes are very faint and they sort of drift away into the mist. And I wanted to convey that, to bring that into the book. It's again a very sad piece of music. So, and we all love sad music, the cheap power of potent music that you look out and say. The version you mentioned, I found it by chance in Singapore, the recording on Orchard Road at HMV, when they were still in HMV. When I saw it, I was absolutely ecstatic, because here was this, it's almost a chamber piece. And I was looking for a chamber piece as a transcription as well, because one of the characters, Magnus, actually plays it on the piano without, you can't have an orchestra in his house, it's kind of an island. So to find that recording felt synchronicity was wonderful to find it here in Singapore, where you can find anything. I strongly believe that. And it's an interesting recording because by a quartet called the Yggdrasil Quartet. Yggdrasil is the tree of life. So it ties into the whole gardening theme as well. It's this tree of life. And if you know, the legend is that the tree is in constant danger of being destroyed by fire and demons and something else. I can't remember.
Okay, now, and now I'm going to ask you the question. Why not the other hill stations in Malaysia? You mentioned that there are two other hill stations. There's Maxwell Hill and there's Fraser's Hill. And Fraser's Hill is where Harold Briggs Gurney was shot and set in the emergency. It was one of the hot spots during the emergency period. So, yeah, why Cameron?
Well, I wanted to write about a tea plantation as well. It's in a way, if you all seen Cameron Highlands tea plantation, how it covers it. In a way, it's very much like a Japanese garden, isn't it? It's tamed by constant plucking. You really have to control the growth. You have to really manipulate the tree not to grow too high. So to contrast this agricultural endeavor, which is done on a huge scale, and then to contrast it with the Japanese gardening, which is done for no commercial reason at all. I thought it'd be an interesting juxtaposition as well. And at that point in time of history, I think there was more happening in Cameron Highlands than in Prediceville. It was more quiet, smaller as well.
Yeah. Possibly. Now, you also mentioned in one of the interviews regarding to your character, introducing a South African character in the book itself. And I think one of the interviews online you mentioned that very few people have actually asked you about it. But it intrigued me that you introduced a South African element into the book. And I know you've explained it's because you found the grave of one Rebek in Malacca and that got him to settle down here. And also, of course, there's a lot of strong ties between Cape Town, actually, in particular, and this part of the world. Because of the slave trade. I was wondering if you could share more about that.
Well, I wanted to write about the South African character. I wasn't comfortable writing a South African character set in South Africa because I felt I wasn't there long enough. It's always annoyed me that foreigners come to your country and then they start telling you how things should be run. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to preach to South Africans. And at the same time, I was getting a bit bored with the South African literary scene where for a long period of time, the books seemed to be about South Africans who had left the country and then they had to come back. And it's always some family members who's dying and then they come back. And then of course they find there's so many changes and they can't cope with it. So it's incredible how many books that were written like that. And I thought, what if I turn it around? What if I brought a very traditional, conservative South African character out of his comfort zone and into this place where nobody would expect him to be? And it was basically me having fun because I have to entertain myself first when I'm writing, otherwise everyone would be bored, the readers would be bored. And as I was writing, after I wrote that book, another South African writer, she wrote a novel in Afrikaans about two Boer War generals who, after the war, went to America, and this is based on fact. They began performing in American traveling circuses, reenacting the Boer War. So it was quite weird to find that all these things could happen. It was plausible as well. That I thought I was being very original and very clever, but apparently I wasn't. So.
And when I asked it was because when I first read the book, the South African character took me off guard. I didn't expect a little bit of introduction of a South African character. I mean, although I know that there are a lot of, because of the slave trade between Indonesia and Indonesia and Cape Town, a lot of the culture from this part of Southeast Asia especially got into South Africa, and some of the words are common.
There are a lot of common words.
Yeah, so and it just struck me that someone had, oh wow, had written about it.
When I did my research, of course, whenever you think of an idea, you have to, I better find out whether it's supported by facts. So researching these World War veterans, I found that a lot of them were sent to Sri Lanka as POWs. And a lot of them stayed there. They did not want to go back to South Africa, which was, after the World War now, run by the English. So they couldn't fit back into their own home. So they remained in Sri Lanka, Ceylon then. And I thought, it's possible that they went elsewhere as well. And, we think globalization is a very new thing. but it's been happening since boundaries were drawn up thousands of years ago, and people have been moving back and forth. So it's not new. It's
Alright, I think at this juncture, I'd like to open up to the floor. Don't need to hog up for the time for so long. So, are there any questions on the floor which you'd like to ask Twan Eng in regards to either the Gardens of Beginningness or his first book?
You can ask anything else outside that.
Yeah. Or his forthcoming book. Which I ask.
Do you feel that writers, even of fiction, have a responsibility to depict history in an accurate fashion or to show that country in a good light? Because both the books have dealt with history of colonization, war, and colonization. I wonder what your view on that.
Well, can you all hear the question? Okay. The question was, do writers have a responsibility to accuracy in writing about history and to show a country in good light? I think we have a responsibility to be accurate in history, and by being accurate, you can't show a country in good light. You can't if you are accurate. So yeah, I try to be accurate. I want to be accurate because it's the lawyer in me that is always very, very particular about accuracy. What I do bend the truth when it suits me in the books. I have a sort of an unwritten policy that I don't erase history, but I add on to it if it helps the book. If I feel that a certain event can cast a better, clearer understanding on history, I will create it. Or if there's a street that I need to create, I will create it, or a house or a character. But I don't take away from what exists. I don't say it never happened. I don't say that house wasn't there, those people were never living there. So that's, in my way, that's how I respect history. And I usually don't, I don't want to write about, I don't want to cast any country in a good light. I just want to show all sides if I can. It's more interesting, I mean, when you write about flaws and flawed characters and flawed nations, than to create this utopia where everything's perfect. But then it becomes very boring. A happy book, everyone's happy. It's not really that.
Any other questions?
Read both books and I enjoyed them, but I read them some time ago, and my memory is sketchy as well. But one of the things that I really enjoyed was what seems to me a very, what I would call a contemporary sense of time, which is about resisting the speeding up of it by really slowing it down in the kinds of things people do who make the Japanese government, to learning a martial art from someone who's not just teaching the movements, but teaching a whole philosophy. And I'm just wondering whether that's something that cuts through your work and how you see it, because that's what it does for me as a reader.
Well, that question hasn't been asked before. Well, for a writer, I think it's very important that you slow things down and you examine the character's interior life. You can't rush through it because you're not writing a thriller, you're not writing a detective novel, you're writing literary fiction. And it's actually, the whole point of literary fiction is actually to make you pause and think and feel and question. And one of the hardest things about writing the second book was, I think The Gift of Rain was much pacier. It moves much faster. So when I wrote that, for some reason, maybe it was a subject matter of gardening, right? Everything slowed down naturally, which got me worried because I kept comparing it to the first book. Oh, in the first book, by page 50, 5 people had died and there were really 3 fights. And this one, they're still sitting there drinking tea. So in the first few drafts, I really tried to add a lot of excitement and this and that, and conflict. And it was just jarring, it was just didn't work. And after a while I realized that this is a different book, and the tempo, the mood is actually completely different. So if the people who were expecting something like The Gift of Rain, I'll just, they won't get it. It's going to disappoint them. And time, again, I'm always interested in how we view time, because time is also connected to memory as well. They're interlinked. Certain things we remember better, certain things we remember worse, but it also depends on how long it's passed and how short while ago it happened, and there's no clear rules as well. What happened yesterday you might have forgotten, but what happened 20 years ago you still can't let go, you're still holding a grudge. So all these things which I think make us human, the way we try to control time through our memories, the way we think we can control time. In my writings, I'm quite fascinated by all these workings, so I try to convey that in the books as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Charlene, for the question. So go back to the...
She was my A-levels teacher, she taught me literature. And I haven't seen her since 92.
Okay, I'm sorry, any questions? Any other burning desires? Okay, yes.
Is there a reason for the recurring Japanese element in both the books?
I suppose it's a lack of originality. I'm interested in the impact of the Japanese on Malaya, because it was such a catastrophic event. It was, up until that point, the most shattering event to have happened to us, because we've always been a reasonably peaceful, strife-free country, and then suddenly you wake up one day and there's a new government in place, and there's a new language you have to learn. All the signboards are being changed to this weird writing. It's quite traumatic. And for the Garden of Evening Mist as well, because the main character suffers from aphasia, which is when she starts losing the ability to recognize language. It's, in a way, a larger context of what she's experiencing, because one day you wake up and you don't understand the signboards. How would you feel? So we walk out now and the signboards are written in Korean or Aramaic, and everyone's speaking a different language. In a way, Yunling's aphasia is the personalization of what's happening on a larger scale.
Okay, thank you on that theme. Before we try and tie things together, any other question?
Just one more. Another thing is the theme of mentorship, and older person mentoring a younger person also has a directing theme on books.
Oh, I see. Okay, I suppose it's the Singaporean in me that I'm interested in mentorship. No, again, I'm interested in power politics. I started learning Aikido about when I was 17 or 18 years old, and I loved the art. I enjoyed it very much, but the one thing that I couldn't tolerate was this blind obedience that you had to give to your instructor. I couldn't give that because the instructor I could see were flawed, they weren't perfect. So why was this blind obedience to them? And the relationship between the master and the pupil I found out is also reflected in Japanese society as well. At various levels, you have somebody superior to you. Not only Japanese society, but a lot of Asian societies as well. And personally, I've always been the type who has to question everything. I just cannot accept orders and not question them. So in both the books, again, I wanted to explore what it means actually to have somebody that you have to obey, even though that you know a lot of the, you know that the person is not perfect. Of course, it generates conflict in a novel, and again, that's what you're looking for as well. I mean, again, if there's no point in both of them get along very well, 2 pages, that's all it is, right? So always conflict. You always have to look for situations which create maximum conflict, because otherwise you have really have nothing to write about. So it's not easy, because you don't want to create a contrived situation where you think, this is just fake. So you have to find relationships where there's already a pre-existing natural order there, and then you try to subvert it in many ways, try to change it around, try to look at it from another angle.
Thank you. May I ask you one question? I want to go back to the point you made when Shaheen asked you about the tempo and the slowing down of the book, and you mentioned earlier when you replied to a question that if a reader was looking at the book looking for the same thing and give it the rain, you'd be disappointed. Actually, I picked up this book looking for the same thing and give the rain, and I wasn't disappointed. And actually, I felt this book moved faster than The Gift of Rain. Having said that, I do sense that in both books you have quite a distinct way or style of slowing things down, and in fact, I remember when The Gift of Rain came out, and I was discussing with some people back then, they did take note of the pacing of the slow pacing of it, and I'm wondering, is it deliberate that
for The Gift of Rain?
No, for both.
Well, I thought The Gift of Rain moved at the clip. With The Gift of Rain, for a while, these literary novels, you felt, come on, you really can move the pace a bit faster. You don't have to sit and do navel gazing for 3 chapters. So, with The Gift of Rain, again, The Gift of Rain is very much a book of subversion. I took various genres and I wanted to turn it around. And so I intentionally made it, to me anyway, quite fast moving. And with the second one, that I had no control over that also. But you're one of the very few people who say that, because I've had a lot of comments from people who say, oh, your first book was so fast, and then this one was, I really struggled with it. So, it's personal taste.
Okay, I moved faster with this book.
Oh.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to ask is about your evocation of space, which I talked about, that both the locale of where your book set in is quite, it adds a lot to the atmosphere of the book itself. I mean, you, both in The Gift of Rain and this one, you painstakingly, in the positive sense of the word, describe a lot of details, so much so that one is drawn into the book, and it's very hard to think, at least for me, because having been familiar with both places you went about, it's very hard to think about these places again, or see the same places in the same light having read both books. So I'd like to ask you about how important is place and locale.
Well, they're very important, because a location, a setting should be a character on its own right, in its own right. It gives life to your characters, it gives life to your book itself. If you write a book where the reader doesn't experience the setting, I think in many ways it's failed. You fail as a writer. Because part of the job of the writer is actually to take the reader into another world, into another time. And for that, setting is very important. And with The Gift of Rain, it was very much intentional, because I looked around and I saw what was happening to Penang, and a lot of the historical buildings were disappearing. So I wanted to, in my own way, preserve them. So intentionally, they were all there, all the tourist attractions of Penang are all there. And also, the sharper readers have picked up that the characters are named after the streets, some of the more famous streets. There's a Hutton Lane in Penang, there's a McAllister Road, there's a Codrington Avenue. Again, I wanted the reader, after they read the book, if they ever visited Penang, I wanted them to have this weird feeling, almost a resonance. And thinking, why is it that this street name sounds familiar. And it's very interesting because at the recent Georgetown Literature Festival, one of the moderators, we were put up at the hotel on Hutton Lane. So he said, I walked out from the hotel and I'm reading this book because he had to moderate me my session. And he said, it's very weird to be reading the book and come out on Hutton Lane. So I said, well, let's ground to some point. And at the last festival, the recent Georgetown Literature Festival, they started this, the Gift of Rain Trail. It was a pilot project. They wanted to create a tourist trail based on the first book. So for a lot of the participants, it was a chance for them to experience in person the settings as well. I personally felt the tour was too long. It started at noon, and then by the time we got back into the city again, it was about 10 p.m. Yeah. But it was lunch. There was lunch at the seaside temple restaurant. We ended up with dinner on Penang Hill, Aikido dinner, with an Aikido demonstration, which I didn't know because the organizer didn't tell me. It was very long, but the participants said they had a deeper sense of the book now. So I was quite happy with that. With the Garden of Evening Mist, I have to tell you, I have to disappoint you and say that a lot of it was made up here. Because I tried to do research, I tried to find materials about what life was like in 1950s Cameron Highlands. I couldn't find any. No books about what life was like. I went to speak to a tea planter in KL. He was quite helpful, but then I realized he was telling me the things that he had already said in many, many interviews, and I already had the articles. I already read the article. So again, I got stuck. I got worried, how am I going to write this? I don't know the routine, or what did people do when they wake up? Where did they go? How did they travel? Did they use a car or a bicycle? Did they have electricity? Little things like that. And eventually I had to tell myself, look, just make it up. Because you're not, that world is gone anyway. If you go to Cameron Highlands today, it's gone. It's no longer there. Very sad.
No, I thought you made up very well. I was wondering how you did that because you've been wondering which part of Cameron Highlands would one build this Japanese garden. And I mean, some of the buildings you mentioned are quite real, the smoke house.
Those were there. Again, I had to make sure that the buildings were, the hotels were there already when the events took place there. But aside from that, nobody really knows what life was like there. It was.
You're right. There are very few sources actually.
Actually none. I couldn't find any.
There's none. No, but there are very few, excepting in the interwar years or slightly after the war. There were one or two articles when they first opened. There was a very brief reporting.
But they don't tell you the day-to-day routine, which as a writer you have to know, even though it doesn't end up in your book. You have to have this sense of confidence about what you're writing, because you guys can detect it if I'm lying my pants off and I don't know what I'm talking about. The reader knows. If you're not sincere, the reader detects it as well. So, and it's what Ernest Hemingway said as well about he called it the iceberg theory. The iceberg, even though only a little bit of it shows above the waterline, what is more important is below the waterline. Bigger stuff is happening there. And as a writer, you have to know what you don't tell the reader. You have to feel confident enough and to convey the sense of, I know what I'm talking about, so keep quiet.
No, but that was, as I said, it was quite convincing because it really got me wondering how you create this entire world or dimension. But I felt it worked because the idea of a garden is creating another world. So,
Yes, that helped a lot. Because there was no Japanese garden there at that point, so I had free hand on what I wanted to create. But I had to draw a map out myself because I was getting confused about the various things in the garden. And I cut out a lot of extraneous stuff as well. There was originally 2 ponds in the garden, and then I got confused because where's it? Simplify. Everything had to be simplified because I was too lazy to write formal.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you for your next book. Sorry, are there any questions I should ask?
You can ask
Yeah,
anything,
please.
even if it's not related to the book, feel free to ask.
Okay,
Yeah,
Shani.
that's another
Okay.
question. Yeah. In light of what you've been talking about, it feels like the oral history, even though these are not stories that come out of oral history, but they speak like oral histories, is something that you're saying something about. I mean, we've lost a lot of our histories because we've not documented more. But there's also, I think, the neglect of what is possible through the oral histories of people who seem ordinary, who seem like they don't have a story to tell. And yet, both books were telling their stories out of a deep, visceral space.
But it's very important, these oral histories, especially for writers, because that's where you get most of your materials from. I found a book which I didn't use in the first or the second one, which was called Japan at War, and it was basically a collection of the oral histories of everyday normal people, housewives, students, teachers, what they did during the war years, how they search for food, how they little things that we all do every day. So, and it was fascinating reading those things because it gives a human dimension to this cold, impersonal thing called history. And I don't find that in Malaysia. I couldn't find any materials on that. So, and it's very sad, and then the lack of interest as well among my contemporaries as well. My friends all, when the Gift of Rain came out, they read the book and said, hey, this one, sure, are you making things up? So, you know, it's and I look at the young people today as well, they don't care, they have no interest. I look at my nephew who's 10 years old, he probably has zero interest in the war, even though was even aware that Malaysia was once colonized by three European powers, and then the Japanese came. They're not interested. It's incredibly sad.
Thanks, Shani. Okay, any question from any? Yes.
You assemble a very interesting set of characters. At any point in the novel, did you ever feel you should be a more prominent character from Malay characters?
Should I have given more prominence to a Malay character? Well, you know, it's not a Benetton ad. The characters. I don't set up with sort of a quota system that I have to have this, the Muhibah, the adverts you used to see in TV, government TV ads in the 80s. It has to feel natural to me when I write. So the makeup of friends and characters, they have to feel that it's organic and natural to me. And if I felt that, when a Malay character walks in or an Indian character walks in, then he's there. But I didn't feel so. It's. I mean, in the second one, there's a Malay character, but it's a difficult question to answer because you have to write what feels natural for the book. And if it doesn't feel natural and you're just putting it because of political correctness, then it's not going to work. I think other writers will pick up, hey, he's just putting these characters there just to make it seem politically correct. And I think society at that time, as well, I think they were quite separate as well. There were each community thought they were superior to the other anyway. So there's a sense of difference there. And that's how I view society in the 1950s, before the government's social engineering came into place and we started saying that we must do this and do that to create more integration. If I wrote a novel set in modern day Malaysia or Singapore, then yes, I feel yes, there should be a more equal representation because that's how society is today, but not during those days, I feel.
Actually, that ties into a question which it got me when I first started reading the book, which is actually your protagonist, Yun Ling, because she's a Chinese judge in the Supreme Court. Yeah? And how possible is that to happen? Because there are not that many Chinese judges, let alone a woman Chinese judge in a court. So that, for me, that created two things. It really got me wondering, could her career be actually possible? And the second question was, the second thing that came was, well, that added a kind of a mythical element to the book, which I suppose at one level helps the book, given the topic that you're writing about.
Well, yes, it was possible for a woman to reach the heights that she did, and in fact there were, I believe, two. You obviously know who she is. She died recently. I didn't base the character on her, but because I saw that it was possible for her to reach that height, I said, okay, it's plausible as well for my character to reach almost that same level in the career. And they had to go to the same law college in Cambridge, because at that time Girton was the only college accepting women. You couldn't go anywhere else. That was the only college, so she had to go to Girton as well. If I said she went to the Uni of London or Oxford, then there will be critics saying that they didn't check his facts. But everything I try to be sort of there's a factual precedent for that.
And then, sorry, it might be from me.
Yeah, I'm just curious, are you still a practicing lawyer? And because I know you said that one of the characters is a judge, and so it's relating to law. I remember one of the writers who wrote The Firm, he started as a young lawyer. So I was, John?
Question.
Yeah, so I was wondering, how does that experience of being a lawyer help you or influence you as a writer?
Well, I'm no longer a practicing lawyer, thank goodness. All lawyers hate their jobs. All they do, when lawyers get together, they moan about their bosses and their judges and their clients and their job. So thank goodness I'm not anymore, but I do miss the money. How did being a lawyer help me in my writing? Being a lawyer, you work with language as well. You have to really dig into the nuance of every word that you use, because if you use the wrong word, a lot of bad things can happen. Misinterpretation, misunderstanding can happen. So you really have to value each word you use. And that, I think, helped with being a writer, because you really, again, with a writer, you can't be shoddy, you can't throw... When I write, I try not to use cliches. Really, really hard. That's the hardest thing, because I had to doctor a script once for somebody, and I was quite shocked at how easy it was to just throw in cliches. The sea was wine dark and flat as glass, and they accepted that. It was shocking that they writing scripts. So getting back to the point, you have to work with language, and you have to, for me anyway, I want to improve with every book. That the writing has to be refined. For every book it has to change, it has to become more, you have to pass it away, it has to be leaner, and it has to be tighter, and you have to convey more in fewer words. So being a lawyer helped with that. But the other aspect I found my legal profession helped as well was that it taught me very much to be professional in all aspects of my life. In dealing with emails, in dealing with agents, in dealing with other writers, in dealing everyone. You answer emails as soon as you get them, or you say, I'm busy now, I'll get it back to you. I'll get back to you within 2 days. You have to do that because you have to be professional. It's a job, it's a career. It's not where you sit in somewhere and you have wine and you write 2 sentences and then it's not like that. And I always know when the people I meet, the writers I meet, I always know if they've ever worked in an office or a profession before, just from the way that they email me or the way that they act and the way they treat other people. Some of them are very lackadaisical with punctuality, which drives me mad because things like that. Many years ago, I did a talk at a private school in KL, and this very young girl came up with the dad, and she pulled her dad to me, and she said, oh no, she wanted to be a writer, and dad, I wanted to be a writer, and she was hoping that, let me rephrase that, she wanted to be a writer, and the dad wanted her to find a proper job and get a proper degree. So she looked at me with great hope in her eyes that I would support her ambition. And Dad looked very worried. So I told the girl, you should get a degree and you should work in an office for 5 years before you start working. And the girl just looked so disappointed, and the dad smiled at me.
Now, on that note, which you were talking about your, the next book being Lina, I want to ask you something about your next book. I read somewhere, you said that your next book, in which you replied in the interview, that your next book is about the history of rubber, and you're going to title it Bounce.
It's a good title, isn't it? Sort of a Bill Bryson, sort of chatty history of rubber. In KL, I can do all the research there. But no, it's very difficult for writers to talk about the books that they're writing or that they haven't written, because it doesn't feel real to me. A chef doesn't come and tell you, hey, I'm cooking this chicken. No, you don't talk about it. You show the chicken to me when you finish cooking it. I can taste it and smell it. You tell me that you're cooking it at the moment. Or you're adding this and you're adding that. I'm not interested in that. So with the writer, it's the same as well. I find it very difficult to talk. And also, I'm worried that other people will steal the idea, which happens a lot. So usually, I give different answers.
So Bounce is up for grabs, right?
That's a copyright title. But at least it's out there on the internet, or somewhere, so when people use it, that was my idea.
Okay, all right. Any questions that to ask him? Ask Twan Eng.
Any questions except how much royalties I always got to ask him.
I have a question, Robin from the press, Mr. Twan Eng, Esquire. My question is, what was the biggest mistake you made in the book, The Gift of Rain? Was there a chapter that you found, having filled with regret, that you could have changed that moment?
Well, it's the honest answer is yes. Every writer will look back at their works and wish that they had changed it. But when I wrote the book, I was at a certain point in my life. I was at a certain age. I was at a certain maturity or immaturity level, and you can't look back now, 7 years later, and say with a different point of view and a different experience, and say I wish I could change that. You can't. And I'm very much against writers who go back and revise their work, because I feel that cheats the reader of the experience. The first time you read the book, you read The Gift of Rain, and that was your experience. And now suddenly you realize that, oh no, there's another version. And you feel that your experience of reading the book somehow has become diluted or changed. So while and I look back at The Gift of Rain, yes, I do wish that I tighten it up a bit, shorten it, but it's there. It marked. It's a signpost of who I was at that time. So I wouldn't, and I don't want to change it. It's you don't ask an artist who painted a picture 5 years ago, oh, would you go back and brush up this and add something else there? It stands as a progress marker of your development as well. So to change it is also cheating yourself as well. Having said that, okay, I know a lot of writers revise their works, but if you want to do that, then to be fair to everyone, to the readers especially, you should have all the existing versions there. You can't withdraw, or you say that version has been, the print run is finished, I'm not going to publish that. I think you should have both versions out there. let people compare or have new generation of readers coming to the new version to have their own experience with the book.
Well, you did rework a section on Suji, right? When you first
Well, for the Garden of Evening is yes, the Kamikaze flashback actually came from a short story I wrote in 2007. Again, with the Gift of Rain as well, the flashback to the Forgotten Emperor was also a short story as well that I wrote. It disappointed me a bit that the Kamikaze story did not get a wider readership because it was for a very select. It was for the Asian Literary Review magazine, which I believe is defunct now.
yeah,
Is it?
you used to be on top.
So that's gone. Nobody can access that story. So I wanted to give it a wider exposure. And also I was feeling lazy that week, I suppose, because I was thinking, how am I going to fill my quota of words today? This story that so you take it out, you really change it to suit the tone of the character who's narrating it, and then you make sure the stitches don't show. And you give it a new lease of life, I think.
Okay. We've got time for one more question. So it's going to be any last questions from the floor. Okay.
I was wondering, so what is your daily quota? Because you said
I've not fixed quota, and I feel that if I've written something good that day and it's substantial enough, then I'm happy with that. I don't have the fixed word count because you can't. Then again, you're just padding things out. When I mentioned the quota just now, it's basically for me to feel that, I did some substantial work today. I can take the rest of the week off because there was a 7,000 words short story that I shot in. So it's more of you feeling satisfied with the work, the quality of the work that you do more than the quantity. That's more important, I think. Having said that as well, the next day I might go back and say, that was horrible, and then you just delete everything and start.
Okay. I think on that note, we have traveled all the way from slowness to the quota of words in a day. Please, really thank you, Twan Eng, for the wonderful session.